Lyra stood at the observation deck of the Zalrix, the colossal alien warship that cut through the dark void of space, its sleek hull gliding effortlessly among the stars. She adjusted the visor of her helmet and stared at the swirling lights of distant galaxies, her mind focused on the mission at hand. A sense of anticipation stirred within her as she turned her gaze to the holographic display, which showed a small human fleet clustered together in the heart of a sector known for its political significance. The humans, once primitive and divided, had rapidly advanced in the last few decades, developing military technology that rivaled some of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. Their speed of progress had alarmed many species, including the Talakoran. Lyra's superiors had given her a delicate and crucial task: spy on the human fleet and report on their most dangerous asset, Captain Elias Grant, the commander of the human flagship, the Phoenix. Her orders were clear: infiltrate the human fleet, gather intelligence on their tactics, technology, and most importantly, on Captain Elias Grant. There were whispers among the Talcoran leaders that this human captain was becoming a symbol of hope and strength among his people. His reputation had spread far and wide, and the Talakoran viewed him as a rising threat. Lyra, an elite officer trained in the art of espionage, deception, and manipulation, was more than capable of carrying out this mission. Her species, known for their intelligence and subtlety, trusted her with the most complex assignments. But this one was different. The humans were unlike any species Lyra had encountered before, and Captain Grant was unlike any leader she had seen. She spent weeks observing from the shadows, studying every detail of the human ship, the Phoenix. Through the advanced sensors of the Zalrix, she could track every movement, listen to every communication, and analyze the crew's behavior. Elias Grant was a paradox in her eyes. From a distance, she noted how he interacted with his crew. He wasn't just a commander. He was a mentor, a protector, and, most intriguingly, a man who seemed to genuinely care for the well-being of his people. His voice, calm and authoritative, yet somehow warm, carried over the ship's intercom system. He wasn't just barking orders, he was speaking to them, guiding them, making them feel valued. It was a stark contrast to the cold and calculated command style she had grown used to in her own species. The crew under Elias Grant's command was equally fascinating. They weren't the perfect, emotionless soldiers that Lyra had expected. Instead, she saw laughter and camaraderie, a tight-knit group that seemed to be united by something stronger than just duty. The way they followed him, not out of fear or blind obedience, but out of respect, was a concept Lyra found difficult to grasp. She had never seen anything like it. The Talakoran believed in power and dominance, in subjugation and control, but the humans, they seemed to believe in something different, something that resonated deeply with their own humanity. Lyra's observations became a daily routine. She would gather data, watch as the human captain navigated crises, whether they were skirmishes with hostile alien ships or internal disputes among his crew. What struck her most was the way Elias handled adversity. In one instance, when an external attack nearly breached the ship's hull, Elias was calm, directing his crew with precision. Yet, there was a subtle empathy in his voice as he reassured his team, encouraging them even when the situation seemed dire. It was unlike anything Lyra had witnessed. She had studied countless species, but the humans' ability to endure, to work together, and to remain hopeful, even in the darkest moments, confused her. The more she observed, the more her feelings shifted. What started as a simple mission of observation soon evolved into something more complex. Lyra found herself captivated by the human captain, not just by his strategic mind or his leadership skills, but by the way he connected with his crew. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a sense of conviction that made him stand apart from every other commander she had ever studied. Lyra, the cold and calculating officer of the Talakoran, found herself questioning her beliefs. Could a species like the humans truly be a threat? Or was there something else at play, something beyond mere power and control? The more she watched, the more Lyra felt an undeniable pull, a connection she hadn't anticipated. The line between duty and personal intrigue blurred, and it left her restless. She had been trained to keep her emotions in check, to stay objective and focused on the mission. Yet, Elias Grant's humanity, the very thing she had been sent to study, to undermine, was beginning to change her perspective. Was it possible that the humans were not the threat she had been led to believe? Or was it something even more dangerous, the realization that the Talakoran might be the real enemy in this new, evolving galaxy? She wasn't sure anymore. The mission, once so clear, had suddenly become much more complicated. As the days passed, Laura found herself asking a question that she had never considered before. What if the humans were not just a threat to be eliminated, but a force that could change the galaxy for the better? She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain: Captain Elias Grant had begun to alter the course of her thoughts, and she couldn't turn back now. The mission had only just begun, but Lara could already feel the weight of the choices she would soon have to make. The Phoenix loomed before Lara, a towering symbol of human ingenuity. From her hidden vantage point aboard the Xalrix, she watched as the warship drifted gracefully through the vast expanse of space. The ship was impressive, its sleek design and advanced technology a testament to the humans' rapid rise as a galactic power. But Lara wasn't here to admire the human fleet's achievements. She was here on a mission. Her orders were simple: spy on Captain Elias Grant, observe his every move, and gather information that could be used to undermine the growing human threat. Lara had spent weeks monitoring the Phoenix, cataloging every piece of data she could find. She'd watched the captain from afar, noting his every command, every decision. He was as calculated as any leader she had encountered, yet there was something different about him. It wasn't just his strategic brilliance or his calm under pressure that intrigued her. It was the way he interacted with his crew. The crew members weren't just soldiers, they were people, loyal not out of fear, but because of something deeper, something unspoken. Elias Grant was more than a leader. He was a beacon of strength, but also of compassion, and that made Lyra uneasy. She didn't know what to make of it, but her mission was clear, and she would not allow herself to be distracted by her growing curiosity. However, fate had other plans. It was during one of her covert missions aboard the Phoenix, a routine surveillance, or so she thought, that Lyra found herself in an unexpected encounter. She had been slipping through the hallways, unseen, her presence masked by the advanced cloaking tech of her suit. The plan was to gather some last-minute intel from the communications hub, but as she moved down a narrow corridor, she heard footsteps, the soft, rhythmic sound of boots echoing in the empty hallway. She froze, instinctively pressing her back against the wall, barely breathing. To her shock, the footsteps were heading directly toward her, and then, just as she thought she might be discovered, a voice called out. "Hello, is someone there?" Laura tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the concealed weapon at her side, but the voice wasn't hostile. In fact, it was calm, even friendly. She took a cautious step back into the shadows, hoping to remain unseen. Then the figure rounded the corner, and she caught her first clear glimpse of Captain Elias Grant. He stopped when he saw her, his expression momentarily registering surprise, but quickly melting into something else: curiosity, perhaps, or simply a recognition of the situation. He didn't draw a weapon, didn't accuse her of anything. Instead, his face softened, and he gave her a half smile. "I didn't expect to find anyone wandering around here at this hour," Elias said, his voice warm and inviting, not at all like the harsh, commanding tone she had heard during his official broadcasts. "Are you lost?" Lyra's mind raced. This was not supposed to happen. She was trained to remain unnoticed, to blend in, to gather information without ever being detected. Yet here she was, face to face with the very man she was supposed to be spying on, and he was speaking to her as if they were simply two colleagues having an ordinary conversation. I'm not lost," Lyra replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest. "I was just exploring. I heard something." Elias chuckled softly, the sound surprisingly genuine. I suppose I should be more careful. Not everyone enjoys the late-night walks around here." He took a step closer, and Lyra instinctively tensed, but he simply stood there, offering a calm, almost amused smile. "Captain Elias Grant," he said, extending a hand. "And you are?" For a moment, Lyra considered pulling away, retreating into the shadows, but something about the human captain's demeanor stopped her. He wasn't acting the way she expected. He wasn't suspicious or cold. There was no hint of aggression, or even the usual wariness that often came with encounters between species. Instead, he was open, approachable, and, dare she admit it, charming in an effortless way. She hesitated, then gave a simple nod, her voice quiet. "Lyra, I'm just visiting." Elias raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, but not pressing her for more. "Well, Lyra, you've certainly chosen an interesting place to explore. The Phoenix is a bit of a maze, but I'm sure you'll find your way around." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the ship the only sound in the air. Lyra's mind raced, torn between staying composed and the inexplicable urge to engage with him. There was something compelling about the way he carried himself, something different from what she'd expected of the humans. "Leadership," Elias said suddenly, breaking the silence. "It's an interesting thing. I've always believed that a captain's role isn't just to give orders, but to understand the people under your command. It's about sacrifice, not just in battle, but in the day-to-day decisions. You can't lead if you don't care." Lyra's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had expected him to talk about strategy, to focus on power and control, but instead, he spoke of empathy, of understanding, of the weight of command. It was a perspective that Lyra had never encountered before, one that left her speechless for a moment. Before she could respond, Elias gave her a knowing look, as if he could sense her internal struggle. "I'm sure you've heard similar things before," he said with a small smile. "But sometimes it's good to hear it from someone else." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't say anything. She knew she couldn't let her emotions get in the way. She was on a mission, after all. Yet, as she walked away from the encounter, her mind raced. She had gathered more than she expected from their brief interaction. Elias Grant wasn't just the strategic commander she had been taught to fear. There was depth to him, a complexity that made her question everything she thought she knew about humans. As she retreated into the shadows, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this unexpected connection, had changed something within her. And whether she liked it or not, it was only the beginning. Lyra continued her covert assignment aboard the Phoenix, though each passing day seemed to make her mission more complicated than she had ever anticipated. What had begun as an exercise in observation soon transformed into something far more personal, a shift she wasn't ready to admit. She had come to study human behavior, to learn about Captain Elias Grant's leadership and the growing power of his fleet. Yet, as the days passed, she couldn't ignore the strange sense of camaraderie that filled the ship's corridors. The Phoenix wasn't just a warship. It was a place where people genuinely cared for one another. It was an atmosphere that Lyra couldn't fully comprehend. Among her own people, loyalty was based on fear and respect for power, but here, it was based on something entirely different: trust and compassion. The more time she spent aboard, the more Lyra saw how Elias's leadership wasn't driven by cold calculation. His decisions didn't always make sense from a strategic standpoint, but they were driven by an understanding of his crew's needs. He listened to them, spoke with them, and made an effort to understand their personal struggles. It was something she had never seen before. Even during the most stressful moments, when tension filled the air and decisions had to be made quickly, Elias remained calm. But it was his ability to keep his crew's morale high, even in the face of danger, that fascinated Lyra. When things got tough, when the crew was on edge, Elias would offer a word of encouragement, a joke to lighten the mood, or a moment to pause and reflect. It wasn't just about winning the battle, it was about taking care of the people who fought by his side. Lyra had always been trained to view people as tools to be used and discarded when necessary. She had learned to manipulate, to deceive, and to exploit weaknesses for the greater good of her people. But seeing Elias in action was starting to erode those beliefs. She watched as he put his crew's well-being above the tactical advantages that many other commanders would have prioritized. One evening, as she sat in a quiet corner, observing the ship's operations, she overheard a conversation between two of the crew members. One of them mentioned how Elias had personally visited a crew member who had been injured during a training exercise, staying by their side for hours to ensure they received proper care, even though it meant delaying the mission. The crew member said Elias had told them, "A mission can be won without one person, but you can't win if you lose the heart of your crew." Laura's heart twisted at the words. She had never seen such dedication. It wasn't just a tactical move, nor a way to build loyalty. It was real care, and it left her questioning everything. Then came the moment that would solidify her doubts. The Phoenix received a distress signal one night, the kind that sent a chill through the crew. A hostile fleet, previously unknown to the humans, had arrived unannounced. They were powerful, and their tactics were unorthodox, catching the Phoenix and its fleet off guard. The attack was swift, and chaos spread quickly. Lara could feel the tension as alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to prepare for battle. She expected Elias to issue harsh, immediate orders, barking at everyone to fall in line. But what she saw instead took her by surprise. Elias stood in the command center, his face a mask of determination, yet his eyes held something deeper, concern. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable warmth to it. He didn't rush to make decisions. Instead, he took a moment, observing the situation, speaking quietly with his officers, asking their opinions. When the battle started, he didn't just give orders. He was right there in the thick of it, directing the crew personally, providing support, and ensuring they knew they weren't alone. It was clear that his priority was the safety and well-being of his people. In the midst of the attack, Elias made decisions that didn't always align with standard military strategies. He pulled back from certain fights when he felt it would save more lives, and at one point he chose to engage in a risky maneuver to protect a group of civilian ships, even though it could have cost him his own vessel. Lara watched as his crew followed him without hesitation. There was no fear in their eyes, only trust. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in battle. The Talakoran fought for victory, for conquest. But here, the humans were fighting for each other. As the minutes stretched into hours, Elias's calm leadership and unwavering focus kept the crew united, and against all odds, they managed to fend off the attackers. When the immediate threat passed and the Phoenix limped back to a safe distance, Elias didn't take credit for the victory. Instead, he gathered the crew, congratulated them for their bravery, and reminded them that the real victory was in how they fought together. Lara stood at the back of the room, unnoticed, her thoughts spinning. She had come here to gather intelligence, to uncover weaknesses in the human captain's leadership. But what she had seen on the battlefield was something she hadn't expected: humanity in its purest form, shining through in a way she had never imagined. The mission was becoming more complicated by the day. Lyra had always believed that the Talakoran were the true leaders of the galaxy, that their methods of control and power were the only way to ensure stability. But now she wasn't so sure. Elias Grant was a man who led with his heart, not just his mind. And that made her question everything she had been taught. Was her mission about eliminating a threat, or was it about stopping something much more powerful, a new way of leading, of being? The seeds of doubt had been planted, and Lyra couldn't ignore them any longer. The situation had escalated faster than anyone anticipated. The Phoenix and its fleet had been patrolling the edge of human space when an unknown alien armada appeared out of nowhere. It was a formidable force, far larger and more aggressive than any enemy the humans had faced before. Their ships were unlike anything Lyra had studied, twisted, biomechanical horrors that seemed to tear through space with ease. The Phoenix wasn't prepared for this kind of assault. The fleet's systems were already strained from previous engagements, and the human vessels were outnumbered. Elias stood at the command center, his face a mixture of determination and concern. The crew, usually composed, were now visibly tense. Even the most hardened soldiers were rattled by the overwhelming force of the incoming enemy. Lyra had been monitoring the situation from the shadows, trying to keep her distance and remain undetected. She had been gathering intel for weeks, but now she was faced with a much larger dilemma. The humans were on the brink of defeat. As much as she told herself that this was just another mission, that her allegiance was to her people, something deep within her stirred as she watched Elias and his crew scramble to prepare for battle. She knew what was at stake. The humans were facing certain annihilation. She could remain hidden, reporting her findings back to the Talakoran, or she could act. Her training told her to stand back, to observe and collect. But Elias made her feel differently. When the call for help came, it wasn't just a plea for reinforcements. Elias needed someone with expertise, someone who could help turn the tide. Lyra, though still torn, realized that her knowledge could be the key to saving them. The thought of watching them perish because she didn't act was unbearable. And so, against her better judgment, she made the decision to step forward. She appeared at the command center, her cloaking device still active but her presence undeniable. Elias turned to face her as she approached, his eyes narrowing for a split second in surprise before he regained his composure. "Lyra," he said, his voice cautious but not hostile. "What are you doing here?" I can help," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. "I studied their tactics. I know how they fight. I can offer strategic advice." Elias regarded her for a moment, as if weighing his options. Then, to Lyra's surprise, he nodded. "All right, we'll need all the help we can get." Without further hesitation, Lyra moved to the tactical station, quickly analyzing the situation and offering her expertise. Her quick thinking and strategic mind were a perfect fit for the chaos they were facing. She was able to predict enemy movements, advising Elias on where to direct fire and which ships to protect. The battle became a dangerous game of cat and mouse, with the alien ships constantly pushing forward, forcing the humans into a corner. Lyra's heart raced as she watched the battle unfold, her mind sharp, focused on survival, not just for herself, but for the humans she was now fighting alongside. The fight was brutal. Enemy ships poured in from all sides, firing relentlessly. The Phoenix rocked with each explosion, and the crew worked tirelessly, following Elias's orders with precision. Lyra had never seen such determination. The humans were not the cold, calculating warriors she had expected. They were fiercely loyal to one another, willing to die for their comrades. She watched as soldiers ran to repair damage on the ship without hesitation, as engineers continued working despite the fires that had broken out in the lower decks. And through it all, Elias stood at the heart of the chaos, directing the crew with a steady hand, never once wavering in his resolve. His ability to keep everyone focused, even when the odds were stacked against them, was awe-inspiring. The battle raged on for hours. The human fleet was battered and outnumbered, but Elias's leadership and Lyra's guidance began to turn the tide. Slowly, one by one, the alien ships fell, that overwhelming force starting to dwindle. But the victory came at a heavy cost. The Phoenix was heavily damaged, and many lives had been lost. When the last alien ship finally retreated, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief, though their faces were pale and grim. Lyra stood by Elias's side, watching the chaos unfold around them. He had led his crew through one of the most intense battles she had ever witnessed, and somehow they had survived. As the dust settled, Elias turned to her, his face tired but grateful. "You saved us," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how we would have made it without you." Lyra didn't know how to respond. Part of her still clung to her mission, to her loyalty to the Talakoran. But as she looked at Elias, standing there covered in grime, his eyes reflecting the weight of the battle, she realized something. The admiration she felt for him had grown beyond mere curiosity. She no longer saw him just as a mission target or a symbol of an enemy threat. She saw him as a leader, as someone who embodied everything she had never been taught to value. The humans had something deeper than power or control. They had resilience, they had hope, and most of all, they had each other. In that moment, Lyra's heart sank. The choice she had been avoiding was now unavoidable. She could no longer remain a silent observer. She had to make a decision. Did she report everything back to her superiors, betraying the bond she had formed with Elias and his crew? Or did she stay, side by side with the humans, and fight for something greater than her mission? The weight of her decision pressed down on her as the reality of what she had become began to settle in. Lyra was no longer sure who her true allies were. The battle had changed everything. The days following the battle were filled with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The Phoenix and its fleet had survived the attack, but at a heavy cost. The ship was heavily damaged, and many lives had been lost. Yet, despite the destruction, there was a sense of unity among the crew, a shared understanding that they had made it through together. Elias, though exhausted, walked the halls of his ship with a renewed sense of purpose. He was a leader, and his crew trusted him more than ever. Lyra, too, found herself immersed in the aftermath, though she couldn't shake the deep sense of unease that had settled in her chest. It had been hours since the battle ended, and the crew had finally started to repair the damage. Lyra stood at the observation window of the Phoenix, looking out into the vastness of space. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. She had fought beside Elias and his crew, watched them risk everything to protect each other, and felt the bonds of camaraderie that she had never known. The humans weren't the cold, calculating warriors she had been taught to despise. They were something more, something stronger. Elias, in particular, had become a figure of admiration for her. His leadership, his compassion, his unwavering determination, they had all left an indelible mark on her. But then, as she stood there, her comm device buzzed. It was a message from her superiors back home. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she read the urgent communication. The Talakoran demanded a full report on her mission. Her success in gathering intelligence on the humans, including the human fleet's capabilities and leadership structure, had been noted. But now her superiors wanted more. They wanted her to return immediately to her homeworld and deliver her findings. The Talakoran had made their decision. They were preparing for a full-scale assault on the human fleet. They saw the humans as a threat, one that had to be eliminated before their power grew too great. Lyra's heart twisted as she read the words. She had always known that this was the ultimate goal of her mission, but now, with the reality of it staring her in the face, it felt different. She couldn't ignore the truth. Her duty was clear. The Talakoran were her people, and she had been raised to serve them, to protect their way of life. But as she stood there, looking out into the stars, her thoughts shifted back to Elias, to his kindness, his unwavering belief in his crew. The thought of betraying him, of turning her back on everything she had come to care for, gnawed at her. She had spent so long trying to understand him, trying to decipher the humanity that had puzzled her from the start, and now she had to destroy it. The decision was tearing her apart. That evening, Elias found her in the ship's command center, standing alone, her eyes distant. He had been searching for her ever since he received news of her strange behavior. She had been distant, distracted, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When he entered the room, Lyra didn't immediately turn to face him. She was standing at the window, her hands clasped behind her back, looking out into the emptiness of space. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice almost unreadable, "I have something I need to tell you." He stepped closer, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What is it, Lyra?" For a moment, she hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, to confess the truth of her mission, the weight of her duty to her people, and the overwhelming conflict she felt inside. She wanted to tell him about her feelings, how they had grown stronger with every passing day, how she had started to see him not just as a commander, but as someone she admired deeply. But the words wouldn't come. The weight of her responsibility felt like an anchor in her chest, driving her down. "I've been ordered to leave," she said instead, her voice cold, distant. "The Talakoran want me to report back to them. They want everything I've learned about your fleet, your tactics, everything." Elias's expression hardened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only sadness. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost as if he didn't want to believe it. She nodded, her throat tightening. "Yes, they're preparing an attack. A full-scale assault on your fleet. They think you're a threat." For a moment, the room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily between them. Elias stared at her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find some sign that she was lying, that this was some twisted game she was playing. But there was no deception in her eyes. The truth was clear, and it cut deeper than any blade. "I never wanted this," she whispered, "but it's my duty. I'm bound to them. I have no choice." Elias's face darkened with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "So, you're going to betray us? After everything we've been through? After everything you've seen?" Laura's heart ached, but she forced herself to stand firm. "I'm not betraying you, Elias. I'm following orders. My people depend on me." Elias stepped back, his expression tightening. "I trusted you," he said, his voice low, filled with disappointment. I thought we were more than just enemies. I thought you might have seen us for who we really are." "I did," Lyra replied softly, but it was too late. The words had already been said, the choice already made. She turned away from him, knowing that once she walked away, there would be no going back. The Talakoran would have the information they needed. The humans, despite their courage and resilience, were about to face a threat they couldn't possibly imagine. And Lyra, no matter how much her heart rebelled, was the one who had to deliver it. The Talkoran fleet arrived in full force, darkening the stars with their vast armada. The human fleet, still recovering from the last battle, was no match for the sheer size and power of the Talkoran warships. Elias stood at the command center of the Phoenix, his face grim as he watched the first salvo of enemy fire tear through the void. The war had begun, and it was a fight for survival, not just for the humans, but for everything they had fought to protect. The humans had always prided themselves on their resilience, but today they were up against an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Lara, aboard her own Talakoran vessel, watched as her people moved with cold precision. She had delivered her report, and now the Talakoran were acting on it. The order had been clear: annihilate the human threat. As the battle unfolded around her, Lyra's heart grew heavy. She had seen the humans in their most vulnerable moments, and yet here they were, facing destruction at the hands of the very species she had been raised to protect. From her vantage point, Lyra watched Elias's ship maneuver expertly, his crew responding to the barrage with bravery and ingenuity. But the sheer scale of the Talkoran assault was overwhelming. It seemed like an endless sea of warships, and the humans, despite their courage, were beginning to falter. There was no stopping the momentum of the Talkoran fleet, and every strike from the humans only seemed to delay the inevitable. Lyra's hand trembled as she watched the Phoenix take heavy fire, the ship's shields flickering under the assault. She knew Elias was on board, leading his crew through the chaos. She could only imagine the toll it was taking on him, knowing that his fight was not just for his people, but for the lives of everyone on his ship, the same lives she had promised to destroy. As the battle raged on, the reality of the situation began to gnaw at Lyra's conscience. She had been taught that the Talakoran were the rightful rulers of the galaxy, that their authoritarian methods were the only way to bring order to the chaos of the universe. But as she watched the humans fight for survival, something deep inside her began to shift. The humans weren't the threat. The real danger was the Talakoran's refusal to adapt, to accept new ways of interacting with other species. They saw power as the only solution, but Lyra had seen the humans' ability to lead with compassion, to inspire loyalty without fear. She had seen Elias put his people first, sacrifice for them, and fight for their futures. And now, as the battle turned darker, she realized that the Talakoran's rule was nothing more than oppression in disguise. It was during a brief pause in the conflict that Lyra received a message from her superiors. The order was simple: destroy the Phoenix, eliminate Elias, and ensure that the human fleet was wiped out once and for all. She closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Her loyalty to her people had been unwavering, but now, with the truth glaring her in the face, she saw the cost of that loyalty. Her people weren't liberators, they were tyrants, willing to crush anything that threatened their dominance. The humans, on the other hand, fought for a different kind of future. A future where strength wasn't about domination, but about unity. Lyra's heart raced as she made a decision. She couldn't fight for the Talakoran any longer, not when it meant destroying everything she had come to believe in. She had to make a choice. Her mission, her entire life, had led her here, but now she would betray everything she had been taught. With a swift motion, Lyra disabled her communication link with the Talcoran fleet and sent an encrypted message to Elias, telling him she was coming to their side. The moment she sealed the message, she turned to the nearest Talcoran officer and gave a curt order: prepare to assist the human fleet. We'll push through the flank. The officer looked at her, confusion flashing across his face. You're abandoning the mission. There is no mission anymore, she said coldly. Not for me. As Lyra raced toward the docking bay, her heart pounded with the weight of her decision. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The Talakoran would see her as a traitor, a deserter, but she didn't care. Her path now lay with the humans. She arrived just in time to see the Phoenix fighting back against the Talcoran forces, managing to avoid a direct hit from a massive enemy dreadnought. Lyra's vessel, now fully aligned with the human fleet, swooped in from the rear, launching a volley of missiles that struck the Talcoran ships, causing massive explosions. The surprise attack created a temporary breach in the enemy lines. Elias, unaware of her presence at first, barked orders to his crew, directing them to press the advantage. Then, as if by fate, their paths crossed on the battlefield. Lyra's ship emerged from the smoke and fire, cutting through the chaos to join Elias's fleet. The moment Elias saw her, recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by a storm of emotions: shock, confusion, and finally, something that might have been relief. You. Elias's voice crackled over the comm, his disbelief palpable. You're with us. Lyra's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. I'm with you now. Let's end this. Together, they fought side by side, each knowing that the road ahead was uncertain. The Talcoran fleet was still a threat, but now they had a fighting chance. The bond they had once shared as enemies had shifted into something else, something born from trust and the undeniable realization that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. As Lyra and Elias exchanged brief, knowing glances in the heat of battle, there was no doubt in her mind. She had made the right choice. The fight was not just for survival anymore, it was for a future they could build together. The battle had raged for what felt like an eternity, with the stars above them marred by the wreckage of war. The Talcoran fleet, once an unstoppable force, had retreated, their ships damaged and their morale shattered. The humans, against all odds, had triumphed, but the cost was undeniable. The Phoenix and its fleet had survived, but not without suffering heavy losses. Lyra stood among the wreckage of the battlefield, the remnants of both fleets floating around them like a grim reminder of the destruction they had all wrought. She had chosen to fight with the humans, and now, as the smoke cleared and the victory was secured, she was left to face the consequences of that decision. The crew of the Phoenix looked at her differently now. Where once there had been suspicion, there was now respect. Lyra's courage in battle had proven her worth, and the humans, seeing her true dedication, were eager to offer her a place among their ranks. It was a strange feeling for Lyra, being welcomed not as an outsider, but as someone who had fought beside them, who had risked everything to ensure their survival. She had once seen the humans as a threat, an obstacle in the way of her people's dominance. But now, standing with them, she understood. They weren't the enemy. They were the future, and she was a part of that future. As the days passed, Lyra spent her time with the humans, helping them rebuild, offering her knowledge of the Talcoran fleet's tactics and technology. She had become an invaluable asset to the crew, and though there were still those who harbored doubts about her past, most had come to see her as one of their own. Yet, despite the warmth she felt from the humans, there was a lingering emptiness inside her. She had left behind everything she had ever known, the Talcoran, her people, her identity. But in doing so, she had gained something far greater. She had gained a sense of belonging, of purpose. And it was with this new understanding that she began to truly contemplate her future. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon of a newly discovered planet, Elias found Lyra standing alone on the observation deck of the Phoenix. She was staring out at the vast expanse of space, her thoughts seemingly far away. Elias approached her quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the metal floor. When he reached her side, he stood there for a moment, watching the stars with her before speaking. "Lyra," he began softly, his voice steady but filled with something more, something that had grown between them over the course of the war. "I've been thinking about what you did, about your choice, and I think I understand now why you made it." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes soft but distant. She had known this conversation was coming. Elias had always been a man of honor, a man who understood the complexities of duty and loyalty. She could see the weight of those same qualities in his eyes now, the same weight that had been on her shoulders for so long. But now there was something else in his gaze, something that made her heart beat faster. "You didn't just choose to fight for the humans," Elias continued, his voice low but full of emotion. "You chose to fight for what's right. And I don't think I ever truly understood what that meant until now. The Talcoran's way isn't the only way. You showed me that." Lyra's throat tightened. She'd have fought so hard to protect her people, to uphold their values, but in the end, those values had crumbled beneath the weight of what she had learned. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, Elias. I thought I was doing the right thing. But when I saw how you lead, how you care for your crew, I realized that the way I had been taught, it was wrong." Elias looked at her, his expression softening. "I know. And I don't blame you for what you did. You did what you thought was right, just like I did. We both made choices, Lyra. And now we're here together in this moment. The war's over. There's a lot to rebuild, but we can rebuild it together." Lyra's heart fluttered in her chest. The weight of the last few days, the battles, the decisions, the losses, felt like a distant memory when she looked at him now. The connection between them, forged through hardship and sacrifice, was undeniable, but there was still so much to consider. She had given up everything to stand by his side, to fight for the future of the humans. But what did that future look like? What was her place in it? Elias stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "There's still a lot we have to figure out," he said quietly. "A lot of rebuilding, a lot of healing. But I want you with me, not just as an ally, but as someone who's made this journey with me. As someone I care about." Lyra swallowed, the words she had been holding back rising to the surface. She had never allowed herself to imagine a future like this, a future where she could truly belong, where she could find peace in the arms of someone who saw her for who she was, not for the mission she had once been sent on. But now, standing with Elias, feeling the warmth of his presence, the truth became clear. This was her new beginning. This was the future she had chosen. "I'm with you," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with conviction. "I'm with you, Elias, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The two of them stood there for a long moment, the stars above them a silent witness to the beginning of something new, a future built not on war and division, but on understanding and unity. The path ahead would not be easy, and there would be challenges to face, but for the first time, Lyra felt certain she had found her place, and it was with Elias. It was with the humans, and together they would rebuild a new galaxy, one where hope and compassion would lead the way.